repeatedly that it is an obvious public health risk to those children and to the communities in which those children are being released. Here in Dallas, the convention center has been turned into a detention facility. I just came from the detention facility at the Kay Bailey Hutchison Convention Center. There are over 2,200 boys being held here right now, ages 13 to 17. The scene upstairs, you walk into a giant convention hall. In one enormous room, there are 2,200 cots, each set out about 6 feet apart from you. So by any measure, conditions are better here than they are down on the border at the Donna Tent City. Instead of sleeping on the floor, these children are now sleeping in cots. They look very much like army cots. Instead of being immediately next to other children, they're 6 feet apart. That being said, when you gaze across a room, a massive room, with 2,200 teenage boys, it takes your breath away. It's tragic. It is horrific. And the most frustrating thing about it is that it was entirely preventable. This crisis that is unfolding is the direct result of political decisions made by Joe Biden and his administration. 3 decisions in particular provoked this crisis. Number one, the first week in office, Joe Biden immediately halted construction of the border wall. I visited portions of the wall that had been constructed. Where it had been constructed, it was effective in slowing illegal immigration. But the construction's not complete, so there are huge holes. The instant Joe Biden was sworn in, construction halted. The holes are left wide open. Illegal immigration is crossing through the holes. There was rusted rebar sitting in huge piles. Equipment still left at the wall idle. The second decision the Biden administration made was to reinstate the failed catch and release policy, so that now when individuals are apprehended, they're given a court date sometime in the future, they're released, and everyone knows that only a very small percentage will ever actually show up to that court date. And third, probably most inexplicably, Joe Biden ended the Remain in Mexico international agreement, one of the most significant accomplishments of the Trump administration. Is President Trump had negotiated with the government of Mexico an agreement that individuals from Central America who are crossing illegally through Mexico would remain in Mexico while their asylum cases were proceeding here in the United States. That agreement, a landmark agreement, resulted in a dramatic decrease in illegal immigration. Last year, in the year 2020, we had the lowest illegal immigration in 45 years. The policies were working. Unfortunately, Joe Biden, his very first week in office, ripped to pieces that international agreement with Mexico and said, in effect, send all of them over to the United States. And that has produced a deluge. The Secretary of Homeland Security has said the number of illegal crossings on the southwest border is the highest that it has been in 20 years. Last month, in the month of February, over 100,000 people were apprehended crossing illegally. Last month, in the month of February, nearly 30,000 children, unaccompanied children, were apprehended crossing illegally. Right now, today, the Biden administration has in custody over 16,000 children. Down in the border, in the Biden cages, and here at the Dallas Convention Center, where even though children are spread 6 feet apart, you still have 2,200 teenage boys interacting, eating meals together, socializing together, and the rate of COVID-positive testing here at the convention center is roughly 10%. Virtually identical, the rate of COVID-positive testing down in the Donna facility, roughly 10%. If that math holds up, that means of the 2,200 teenage boys here, roughly 220 will test positive for COVID-19. In Harlingen, of the illegal immigrants being released, they're testing positive for COVID-19 at a rate 7 times higher than the U.S. population. This is a humanitarian crisis, it is a national security crisis, and it is a public health crisis, and all of this was entirely preventable. Happy to take any questions.
Senator, I wanted to ask you, because on Thursday, President Biden said that, he blamed former President Trump for dismantling what was in place before. And he also said that he didn't want migrant children to starve south of the border, indicating that they were before. What's your response to that?
Well, I think President Biden's comments last week blaming Donald Trump for this immigration crisis are ludicrous. They're transparently ludicrous. Last year, we had the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. The policies were working. The only aspect in which he might be right to blame Donald Trump is that he's not president anymore. Because it was Joe Biden coming in as president that ended Remain in Mexico and that reinstated catch and release. And I will tell you, I spoke with 2 senior leaders down in the Rio Grande Valley. One, a senior leader of Customs and Border Patrol, another, the head of the Customs and Border Patrol Union. Both told me they met with the Biden transition team. And both said the Biden transition team asked them, what should we do at the border? And both of them said, the most important thing, keep the Remain in Mexico policy. If you end Remain in Mexico, and if you reinstate catch and release, the result will be a massive influx of illegal immigration. They warned them. And Joe Biden did not care and went ahead anyway. That was driven by a political mandate. That was not common sense. This was an international agreement that was working, that was successful. And what Joe Biden has done now is he has essentially invited illegal immigration. He has told anyone in Central America and South America or across the world, and I say across the world because in addition to tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of illegal migrants coming from Central America, we're also seeing migrants coming from Africa, coming from Asia, coming from all abroad, crossing illegally through Mexico, because Joe Biden has said essentially the border is open. If you come and you bring a child, and you say you're in a family unit, you get to stay. Just a few years ago, the large majority of those apprehended at the border were single males, single adult males. At the time, roughly 2% of single adult males arrived with a child. Today, the latest stats I've heard is roughly 50% of single adult males arrive with a child. Why is that? Because the Biden administration has announced if you have a kid, that child is a get-out-of-jail-free card. When CBP was doing DNA testing of the kids presenting with adults, roughly 30% of those children were not related to the adults claiming to be their family member. And the pattern we're seeing that is truly horrific is the cartels that are smuggling these children in are telling adult males who want to cross illegally into the country, many of whom may have criminal records, many of whom may have gang backgrounds, that if you bring a kid, you get to stay. And horrifically, we're seeing patterns where the cartels are renting children to adult males who don't know those kids. And I heard from Border Patrol agents who described seeing the same kid come in with multiple groups because after that adult male comes in with a child, the cartel, in some instances, is bringing the child back and having that child be a ticket to another adult male coming in. And far too many of these kids are being physically abused and sexually abused. Here at the Dallas Convention Center, I asked about what they're seeing in terms of physical abuse and sexual abuse. And the leadership from HHS told me that in more than 50% of the instances, they see the indicia of abuse. They see children who have been abused, physically abused, sexually abused. We hear horrific reports of young girls, 11, 12, 13 years old, being put on birth control pills because the odds are so high that those little girls are going to be raped by the human traffickers that are smuggling them in. This is barbaric and inhumane. And the Biden administration seems to think that if it extends an open invitation for children to come, that it is somehow being compassionate. That is resulting this year, it is projected, we will see over 100,000 unaccompanied children, many of whom will be physically and sexually abused. That is not compassionate, it's not humane. It is barbaric, and it needs to end.
Senator, what's your assessment of security inside this facility? You know, there were several individuals over the weekend who were able to get away from this facility. Is the security here adequate, and what did you find out as far as how that goes?
So I don't know. When I was there today, there was a significant law enforcement presence. I don't know how constant that law enforcement presence is, if that was just today or if that's a steady level of law enforcement presence. As you noted, 4 young boys escaped from this facility and scaled a chain link fence and climbed down. Apparently, it was described to me as about 70 feet. They climbed down and crossed a freeway and crossed a train track. That is obviously a dangerous situation. Those young boys were apprehended and I'm told sent to a different facility that is more of a secure facility. I inquired the extent to which there had been instances of violence among the children here. What I was told is that the incidents of violence between the kids have been quite minimal, but that in excess of half the kids have suffered violence in the journey up. In 2014, I went to the detention facilities that the Obama administration had constructed at Lackland Air Force Base. Those were some of the first cages. We've heard for 4 years Democrats talking about kids in cages. What they rarely acknowledge is those cages were built by Barack Obama. They're new cages being built by Joe Biden, and they're bigger and more full today than they were before. But at Lackland in 2014, I'll never forget the Obama HHS telling me that the cartel members who were smuggling kids in, that they would put a gun to the head of little boys and little girls. And they would force those children to cut off the fingers or cut off the ears of other little kids. And in most of these instances, the parents of those children had paid the smugglers $3,000, $4,000, $6,000 to take their kids north to America. And they would then send the fingers or ears of their child to try to extract several thousand more dollars. And the Obama HHS was encountering little kids, some of whom had horrific physical injuries like missing fingers and missing ears, and others of whom had horrific psychological trauma from being forced at gunpoint to carry out those acts of mutilation. The cartels who bring these kids over, they are vicious criminals. And we are seeing right now an escalating pattern of kids being subjected to that violence because of the decisions of the Biden administration. Well, let me open up to a couple more questions. So if there's an effort to vaccinate them, I was not informed of it. Down in the border at the Donna facility, many of the kids are not being tested. So in many instances, when you have the Biden cages packed with in excess of 4,000 people, most of whom are children, packed into those cages, many of them haven't been tested. 2 days ago when I was there, I saw a group of about a dozen to 15 teenage boys, all of whom had just tested positive that morning. So that was just one quick snapshot. They're coming straight out of the cages, and so the numbers are much more widespread. But if the administration is vaccinating these children, that they did not inform me of that.
Last question.
So I'm confident there are going to be many more here in Dallas. This facility has been open just about 2 weeks, so it's a fairly short time frame that it has been open. It is already packed. I will tell you, the sight of looking across a gigantic room and seeing 2,200 teenage boys all in cot after cot after cot is horrifying. This is the human tragedy of the Biden border crisis. And let me point out, you shouldn't have to take my word for it. You shouldn't have to have me describing it to you. Joe Biden refuses to allow the media to see what's going on here. When I took the trip to the border, when I went to the Donna facility, I brought a total of 19 senators down to the border to see what was happening. I requested the administration that the media be able to come. And Joe Biden said no. We are seeing a Biden lockout, a media blackout. And by the way, I have gone down to the border many, many times. Donald Trump didn't lock the media out of border facilities. Barack Obama didn't lock the media out of border facilities. George W. Bush didn't lock the media out. Bill Clinton didn't lock the media out. It is only Joe Biden in recent history that has done this. And the stated justification is the risk of COVID. That the Biden administration says each of you, it's an unacceptable risk that you might have COVID, that a single cameraman, and by the way, it's not complicated for one TV camera to come in and be a pool camera and get footage. But the Biden administration says they're not afraid of you individually, they're afraid of the cameras you're holding. They're afraid of the American people seeing the absolute crisis and disaster that they have caused. Down in Donna, I went ahead and filmed what was occurring there because I believe the American people have a right to see what was happening. In my office, we blurred out the face of the children to respect their privacy, but the inhumane conditions, the American people have a right to know. And the media, you ought to be outraged that you haven't been able to go in and see this room with teenage boys lined up one after the other, after the other, after the other, almost as far as the eye can see. The reason the Biden administration doesn't want you there is because they don't want the American people to see the human suffering and tragedy that their failed policies have produced. I will also note that by all appearances, nobody in the administration is in charge of things. Joe Biden held his first press conference in 3 months last week, where he had no satisfactory answers on the Biden border crisis. What he stated was categorically false. He stated, among other things, the media are allowed access. I would ask each of you, you know the answer to that. Have you been allowed access or not? The answer is no. And that is a flat-out falsehood. But not only that, President Biden said he wasn't in charge, but Kamala Harris was going to be in charge. She was going to be in charge of the border crisis. So it was clear that Joe Biden wanted nowhere near this disaster that his political decisions had created. And then just a couple of days later, it was announced Kamala Harris wasn't in charge either. So either she was fired or she quit. But either way, Biden's not in charge and Harris is not in charge, and it's not clear who is. And the tragedy of this is President Biden has no plan to end the suffering that's occurring upstairs.
Is there an answer?
There absolutely is an answer. So we know what the answer is because just a few months ago we had policies in place that were working. Last year, in the year 2020, we had the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. Last year, there were many, many fewer children, little boys and little girls being physically abused and sexually abused by traffickers. And the answer is end catch and release, and reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy. We've seen that they work. And the Biden administration, for political reason, refuses to do so. And so, if they're not willing to act, then this crisis will only get worse and worse and worse, and more people will suffer, and public health and safety will continue to be endangered. In Harlingen, Texas, the illegal immigrants that they're releasing are testing positive for COVID at a rate 7 times higher than the U.S. population. This is a disaster, and it is a man-made disaster, and the man who made it is President Joe Biden.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Sorry, we got to run. Thank you.